Hello, everybody. This is Dr. Mark Opler speaking, and I am here today with Dr. Scott Hunter. And today we're going to be discussing clinical trials in autism and neurodevelopmental disorders. Scott, would you mind introducing yourself to our audience?
No, not at all, and thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm Dr. Scott Hunter, and I am professor of psychiatry and behavioral neuroscience and pediatrics, and director of neuropsychology at the University of Chicago and the University of Chicago Medicine and Comer Children's Hospital. I'm also a consultant with MedAvante-ProPhase.
Thank you, Scott. Again, appreciate you taking the time to speak today. I thought it would be good for us to spend a little bit of time getting an update on the overall state of the field in clinical trials in autism and neurodevelopmental disorders. There's been a certain amount of development there, some exciting changes. Maybe we could just begin by having sort of a quick catch-up. What is new and exciting? What has happened in the recent past in this area?
Well, I think one of the most exciting things that I've been involved with is the identification of the frequency and the range of severity of autism spectrum disorders and other neurodevelopmental challenges in children who have been born premature and at very low birth weight, and better understanding as a result of this ongoing research the risk that exists for this group of individuals who are often kids who in the past were very difficult to manage, and now with many changes in neonatal care are actually showing much greater advancements in terms of their development and their opportunity. And one of the key things is understanding the risk for a range of challenges that are consistent with the identification of autism spectrum disorders, and how to best look at ways of treating these concerns, given that in many cases the profile of autism spectrum disorder is actually more tied to a higher functioning profile and one where there is greater prevalence of co-occurring ADHD. And so there's been a lot of growing work and understanding that at this time.
Well, it's very exciting. I think that the more we understand both about the risk factors and the phenomenology, the better we'll get at designing our trials and also picking the right outcomes.
Without a doubt. What I've been most intrigued by is the fact that we are really moving in this area to better understanding the broad range of phenotypic differences that contribute to making sense of what we classify as the autism spectrum disorders, and better understanding the different variables that are at play that predict risk, which then allows us to begin to, I think, better identify groups where different treatment approaches and certainly different compounds pharmacologically may be the most useful.
It's interesting you should say that, Scott. I mean, there's been some positive news from Roche, from other companies. There's been renewed interest in the gut and the GI microbiome as a potential target. Can you give us any insights, any news that you think is relevant from your perspective in this area?
Well, I think one of the things that's been very intriguing to me has been the growing investigation with individuals who are vulnerable to developing symptoms consistent with autism spectrum disorder, and the relationship with the environmental factors that looking at the microbiome is really actually giving us kind of a new window to start to make sense of. And I think that, as you were describing, by advancing work looking at the relationship between the developing internal kind of environment and its relationship to a number of factors, both that may be at play prenatally as well as then postnatally, and how that may give us a greater understanding of ways of kind of segregating different phenotypic expressions. That's actually going to help us begin, and I think we're beginning to see some of that play out, the kind of range of different challenges that are happening neurochemically that we might be able to better treat.
I think that's an excellent point. I think a lot of us, to be frank, have been skeptical for some time about the role of the GI tract and the microbiome in autism and autism spectrum. But some of the evidence that's coming out, I think, is harder to ignore, even to the skeptics. So it's exciting to hear you say this, and I think it definitely opens up new avenues for investigation.
Yes.
Any go ahead. Sorry, I want to make sure you get your say here, because yours is the opinion of import.
I was jumping the gun to see what you were going to say next, so we're fine.
Sounds good. Well, I want to, if I can, move from the gut into symptomatology. I think one of the things that has happened historically in studies of autism spectrum and related disorders, there's been a lot of focus on agitation and aggression, and a certain amount of focus on attention. As you mentioned already, ADHD is one of those comorbidities that seems to travel with subjects who have various iterations of autism spectrum. I guess a question for you: are we finally moving beyond those domains? Are we getting to what some of us think are more core, such as the social impairments and impairments in social cognition and performance? Is there any signs of progress there that you feel merits discussion?
I think that's a great question. And I would say without a doubt that there are, in fact, some indications coming from a series of different drug trials at this point in time, looking at being able to better target some of these other challenges that you had mentioned, so that we can begin now to focus much more directly on the social and the reciprocal communication considerations that are at play. Because we're getting to a point of better understanding that one of the key features across the autism spectrum disorders is this failure to be able to effectively make sense of information that is typically transmitted socially and through the face. There is now a much greater emphasis on, from both the behavioral side, efforts to begin to try to guide more effective interactions, and to do that from an earlier stage of development. Actually, one of the key things is trying to really get better at identifying individuals at later infancy and very early toddlerhood to begin very intensive interventions from the behavioral side, but also beginning to look at whether the compounds that are addressing some of the anxiety features and the inattention features are ones that actually can support and better guide our ability to then address those social concerns. I also am aware of the goal to better understand some of the neurochemical considerations that underlie social processing, and looking at particular hormonal as well as neurotransmitter based foci for compound research.
Thanks for that. You mentioned new compounds and new targets. Obviously one compound in particular that has received a lot of attention is balovaptan, and this is a small molecule, as memory serves, acting at the vasopressin receptor, and it was given breakthrough designation by the FDA early last year, and has moved, if I understand correctly, into phase 3 trials. Do you have any thoughts about balovaptan? The studies have been done, or the mechanism of action. Anything you want to share with our listeners that you feel is worth mentioning?
Well, I find this to be a very exciting area of research, and I will, in my role of being completely upfront, am involved at U of C with colleagues who are co-PIs on the balovaptan studies. And we're now looking at late adolescents and young adults, and looking particularly at individuals whose social challenges are most of concern. And I think that this is actually, given the research that's been done already with this compound, really a very promising area, and it's an exciting one. I'm involved in helping do assessments of the subjects in these studies, and so it's giving me a chance to kind of from the ground floor, see what in fact is being focused on. And the key with this is really looking at adaptive and social functioning, and the research to date has been very promising.
Well, that's great to hear, and we obviously are watching. All of us in the field are watching this study very carefully to see what we can learn. Regardless of the outcome, I think it's wonderful to see progress in late stage development on a molecule that's intended for treatment of autism spectrum.
100% agree, and that we're actually at a stage now where we have the ability to address multiple challenges that are at play for individuals with autism spectrum disorder. Really puts us in a very different place than we were even just 10 years ago.
Well, that sense of progress, I think, is essential for families caring for their loved ones suffering with autism spectrum. Now, shifting the focus of our conversation for just a second, can you give our listeners any information, any news that you think is relevant about assessment of autism? For many years, we've been, I don't want to say stuck, because we've had the same measures, the same batteries, for a very long time. Is there any development, any news in that area that you think is worth talking about?
That's a tougher one, because right now I would say, specifically from the neuropsychology realm, the emphasis continues to be on the utilization of the Autism Diagnostic Observation Schedule as truly one of the key measures. Definitely the decision to utilize the MCHAT and additional measures that have been developed with pediatricians and with developmental clinicians very early on, and beginning to identify individuals who are believed at risk, has been a very important move. There are a number of studies that are right now looking at both refining measures like the MCHAT, as well as measures that allow us to more effectively address particular behaviors and concerns like the Autism Diagnostic Schedule and a number of other tools that have been traditionally less commonly used. And one of the problems certainly has been how to have measures available that can be used in clinical trials and to gain the information in an effective way. And I think that that's an area that's actually beginning to be refined. The key component with this as well is that many of these measures are now being translated to be used in other countries, in other languages. One of the key areas that I'm most engaged by is the movement to use the ADOS, the MCHAT, and the social responsiveness scale, and the the SCQ as well, in China, where they're actually now beginning with very large population of individuals to begin to do the efficacy studies and also making the adaptations that are necessary for different cultures.
Well, thanks for that. I think, one of the things that intrigues a lot of people in the area is, the potential for moving beyond traditional scales and into technology. So, is there
Yes.
a role,
Yeah.
for example, for wearables? Is there a role for more automated methods of analysis that will help us transcend some of the
Yes.
challenges that we've historically faced? I mean, I think you mentioned a number of very important tools, frontline screening tools like the MChat, sophisticated diagnostic tools and observation schedules like the ADOS. Is there a role for technology as an outcome measure in treatment studies and intervention studies?
Without a doubt. I think that the research looking at eye tracking and the fact that we now have methods for using eye tracking technologies in diagnostic settings is something that is under investigation and is moving forward. The other interesting thing is the use of virtual reality as a component of assessment. Putting individuals into situations where they actually have to demonstrate live how they're able to engage is proving to be very useful. One of the things that we have found about individuals with autism spectrum disorders is that they often are more comfortable engaging with technology. And so not only do we see areas of challenge with them, but we also can use these tools, and at least in the empirical settings, they've been shown to be very helpful in understanding greater strengths that individuals actually have that we're not necessarily able to pick up in a kind of one-on-one social interaction, human to human.
Well, that's great to hear. I think we have for a while in other therapeutic areas, for example, in traditional psychiatry, looked at VR, virtual reality, as a potential avenue forward to look at performance and different aspects of reaction. But being able to do that in an environment that's controlled through VR gives us a lot more flexibility. I guess a question for you then, Scott, thinking from there forward, how long will it be until these kinds of measures are ready for prime time, whether it be in drug trials or other forms of intervention research?
I'm going to be pretty optimistic here, and I think within 5 to 10 years, we're actually going to see a much greater opportunity for using technologically based assessment tools. One of the things that's taking place right now that's a little bit of a challenge in terms of making the adjustment is that most of the traditional measures for looking at cognition and looking at a number of the neuropsychological functions are moving to technological models as opposed to traditional interactive and pencil and paper types of model assessments. And I do believe that with challenges in the neurodevelopmental area, like autism spectrum disorder, and some of the intellectual disability syndromes, we're actually finding that we can gain more information by moving to using iPad-based presentations and using more opportunity to engage with computer-based systems for presentation. And I think that really by 10 years from now, we're going to be in a whole new world with doing assessment. And I think that then it's going to actually allow us to do a lot more real-time consideration and actually consideration within the environments that the people interact in on a day-to-day basis.
Well, that's exciting to hear, and it certainly gives us something to look forward to in the future. So, in the interest of leaving our listeners with a couple of take-home messages, Scott, what do they have to look? What do we have to look forward to in, let's say, the next 2 years? Let's shorten our horizon a little bit.
Okay.
What do you think is going? Again, 10 years is a long time for folks. Although we're patient, we're obviously patient as a field. What's going to happen in the next year or two that you think is going to be exciting for clinical research and for treatment of folks with autism spectrum?
Well, I think that without a doubt, within the next 2 years, we're going to have some very intriguing data from a number of ongoing studies, many supported through the NIH and through the ECHO Consortium, looking at biomarkers that help us better understand the relationship between the environment and risk, by both looking at information regarding the microbiome, but also even more directly at neural function in tandem with looking at a series of different serum and other biomarkers. I also think that within the next 2 years, we're going to have a really good understanding about the usefulness of the compounds that have to do with addressing social functioning and how we can take advantage of those in conjunction with more active and assertive behavioral interventions and start to do some pretty interesting real-time investigations in the environments that individuals live in and then learn in.
That is a compelling future vision, Scott, and it leaves me with hope for what we're going to do together to advance treatment in autism spectrum. Thank you again for taking the time to be with us today. I've enjoyed the conversation as always, and look forward to hearing from you again in the future.
Thank you, and also look very much forward to continuing to talk and to look at where things are going to go and how we can kind of lead that more actively.
Thank you again. Ladies and gentlemen, this has been a conversation with Dr. Scott Hunter. Thank you for your time. Thank you for listening.